um, the exposure values so that if you overdo it, you end up with a white file, white image. You can average them so that, let's say you do 5 exposures, each one gets a fifth of the exposure for the total. You can do brighten, which picks out the bright areas of the image and overwrites the dark areas on the initial exposure if there's a bright area over it. And then you can, the other option is darken, which is just the opposite. If you have a bright initial exposure area on the first exposure, and then you are using darken blend and something darker, it will cover over the lighter area. So you can clip out dark or bright areas depending upon the blend mode you want to use. Unfortunately, you can't switch between blend modes while you're doing the exposure. It all has to be the same blend mode. Does that explain what?
Yes, thank you, Andrew.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a question for you, Andrew. So all these images, were they from different frames of that, the side of that structure that you showed in the first?
Yes.
Okay.
All from that garage door.
Okay, so you took all these pictures at different locations on that wall.
Right.
I see. And I've done multiple exposure in my Canon as well. I have a 6D, so it may not have the capabilities that your camera does. So what I've done in the past is just put it on multiple exposure mode and then take my 9 frames, whatever number I want to do. But I don't know, maybe I have that capability, I don't know, but I didn't think I had the capability of changing the settings. For example, the depth of field and so forth in each of those 9 frames. I thought it was pretty much just, you know, one setting and you're getting these 9 that are now going to be merged inside the camera. So does your camera have the capability of then saying, okay, my first shot is X, I want my second shot now to be, you know, at 2.8 instead of 5.6 or something? Is that how it works?
Yes, you can change. I don't think you can change your ISO, but you can change your focus, your shutter speed, and I think your aperture.
Mm-hmm.
With I think most of the, well, I'm not sure about the 6D, but the
Yeah, it's
5D,
kind of an old, outdated model by now.
the 5D Mark III and IV, and then the EOS R, which was the initial one that Canon released, the mirrorless. And
Oh yeah.
And then their more expensive mirrorless ones have the capability of changing the blend modes or choosing a blend mode for each different exposure.
I see.
Okay. And you can either have the camera continuously release the shutter for the number of exposures you want, or you can selectively choose one at a time, which is what these were made with.
And I have one more question. So that structure that you got these images from, that was a black and white image that we saw a minute ago, but are these color or black and white? They just happen to be on a white building.
I'm not sure what you're asking.
Well, how
It
did you?
started
shoot
out
the-
as color.
I'm sorry?
All of them started out as color.
Okay, so you did do post-processing outside of camera then?
I just changed the from color to black and white.
I see, okay, got it.
And I might have removed some detritus that was in the image,
Mhm.
but I didn't do, this wasn't done in Photoshop
Yeah,
with multiple layers and
no,
different blend modes. It was all done, the basic image was done in camera with the
mhm.
multiple exposure.
Yeah, well, they're absolutely beautiful, Andrew.
Thank you.
Andrew, this is Doug. We got about 5 minutes left, and I wonder if you could just, since there's just the 10 images, if you could just show them again one at a time for a few seconds each, just so we can kind of get the sense of the body of work. And while you're doing that, if you could talk a little bit about the paper and the mounting choice, which is beautiful. What made you decide to do that the way you did?
Okay. I wanted I love the decollage. It gave it more of a handmade appearance to the image. And I'm not very adept with my hands. And these images, I didn't want to waste, the paper is expensive. I didn't want to waste a lot of paper tearing the edges myself. And so I found museum etching rag, had pre-made deckled single sheets. These are 8.5 by 11s, but you can get 13 by 19 and 17 by 22. And I took the images to Mel's frame shop downtown. I can't give you the address, but she's really good. And I told her I wanted to float them either on a white background or a background mat board that complemented the background of the image itself.
Mm-hmm.
And we decided to go with the gray, light gray background, which made the deckled edge stand out a little bit more. And she was able to float it and then frame it. And I ended up with, I think 16, these are 16 by 20 size mats they're on. So I'm not showing you much of the overall mat here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Andrew, did you try other papers before you settled on this one?
I did. I tried other Hahnemuller papers, but I really wanted the deckled edge.
Mm-hmm.
And this was the only paper that came pre-deckled. I know it's not very difficult, but I wanted it to look professional. And so I chose pre-deckling.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, those are just beautiful.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for showing those. And I think I'm gonna have to call time right now so we can get to Carol. But thanks so much, Andrew.
You're welcome.
All right, Carol Isaac, are you ready? Let's see, there we go. Carol, we can't hear you, so let's make sure we've got your mic here.
She wasn't mute. She was muted.
Okay, hold on just a second. Let's see. Carol, if you can, there you go.
Okay. Very much by accident, we have an interesting date. In 1906, on April 18th, at 5:12 in the morning, San Francisco had an earthquake. Long before there was Disneyland, there was Chinatown. And the Chinatown in San Francisco evolved as a result of this earthquake. When the city was reconstructed, the government of the city and merchants from the Chinese community got together and they decided that this dark place where no white people came to visit would be made interesting. It would be made into a tourist site. And they evolved something that they called Chinatown in a way that every other Chinatown, a format that every other Chinatown in the world has used. It is at once, three things. It is a tourist site. It is also a place where Chinese people come to buy groceries and perhaps ceramics that they need. And it's a place where those of us who want an inexpensive purse or an inexpensive shawl might go to pick up a bargain. So as a result of somebody who has worked with me in China, she asked me for images from Chinatown. And very much by accident, my husband and I had pre-planned a trip to drive to San Diego. Along the way, I photographed in Portland, I photographed in San Francisco, and I photographed in LA. These are the photographs. I have no music, and I don't think there's very much to say about them. I think they stand on their own. So it's China in America, California, and Oregon. And that's the end.
Very nice.
Thank you.
Carol, I love those images. And when you're out there, doing the photography, like what are the deciding factors of when to click the shutter?
Who the hell knows?
Well, something's, giving you those synapses are, sending those electrical impulses to your fingertip, unless your camera's on some kind of auto.
No. So there are a couple of kinds of images. There are images like this, which I think are drawers with herbs in them, medicinal herbs. And the only reason I know what is the top is because you see this little thing sticking out, which I didn't create, it was there. So there are these images that sit on the surface. But then there are images that, I think this is one, where I'm creating almost an abstract surface. And you have to work a little bit to see the guy in the middle, the guy in the bottom. So that I have a variety of ways to see. Does that make sense?
Well, I'm wondering, like, are you, when you go there, when you go to one of the Chinatowns,
Yeah.
do you have like a preconceived, or are you just attracted to color and, like I'm trying to figure out what the trigger point is.
I walk into a space and I say to this space, hit me. So I don't remember where this came from. But this may have come from Portland. But I was interested in the idea of the American image and the Chinese image married, because it really is marriage. I mean, these Chinese have been in the United States for maybe 3, maybe 4 generations. They're not new immigrants. So, but their sense of their culture is very alive. You can even see back here, there's a little Buddha. And the mythology stays alive. Probably there are stories that parents tell their children. And children are rewarded with envelopes with money. So you buy your red envelopes to give, perhaps for birthdays, perhaps for holidays. And people put banners on their doors. So there has to be a place to procure those things. And, if you go looking for children's toys, you don't want to give a Black child a little European blonde baby. So you need to have babies who resemble the culture. So this baby, it has a baby strapped on her back. And here's a kid doing everything that your kid and my kid did. And in fact, that I did myself. And all the crap that comes from our culture and their culture. Then there were these street performers. I think there are only 2 strings on this thing that looks like a banjo. You can see that there's an instrument down below. Oh, there are two instruments, one here and one here. Oh, and another here, that's three. And he's holding this banjo-ish instrument, but he's happy. He's happy to have me take his picture. Whereas he's given some thought, like, what, you white girl, what are you doing this for? But look, that the instrument that he's playing has things like strings on it. And here you can buy all kinds of stuff. I think this is dried cuttlefish, but I'm not sure. And if you happen to need a massage, I always need a massage. It's the best massage in town. And I included Portland's garden. So this came probably from Portland's Chinese garden. This is very interesting. This is the new Chinese museum downtown, where we had a Chinatown that was well populated. The Chinese have actually left downtown, and they've moved into very assimilated areas. They've moved to East 82nd, they've moved to Beaverton, but in their place, which I think is a very interesting idea, there is a museum of their culture. So we actually have a specific, not an Asian museum, a specific Chinese museum downtown. I doubt that it's open. And here is dragon fruit. And these are people who carry the dragon on the street, who wear the dragon for events. This is a game that's very much like Go, and it's very much like chess, that the name of which I actually knew, but I didn't write it down. And this was taken near, this is the only picture that was not taken in Chinatown. It was taken near Silicon Valley, one of the towns in Silicon Valley. And he's playing this instrument that has, look at this, look at the bow. And we've seen this, oh, the lady. In Portland, we have a group of amateur Chinese opera singers, and they give performances. So here I am at the performance, photograph, and they're not where I have actually seen performances in China. The Chinese costumes are extraordinarily more elaborate than this, but somebody has made this woman up in a classical way. And a restaurant, and remember I said in San Francisco, the city government and the merchants got together to construct this place, this fantasy tourist place. And it's symbolized by these things.
Carol, sorry to interrupt. I'm gonna tell you we have about 5 minutes left. So I'm just gonna see if there's another question maybe that we can.
Okay, that's good. I think there are none.
Well, it's like, I actually have a question. It's like 1 or 2 images ago, it said the city of Hong Kong. And it's interesting, it's like the images that you showed are Han. And, it's like, I wonder how much of the politics bubbles up in these various Chinatown environments that you can pick up.
I couldn't pick it up. In New York City, the Chinatown is very old, and the original Chinese residents in New York City are Cantonese. But the newest residents in Chinatown in New York are Mandarin speaking, and they can't speak with each other.
Right.
It's unfortunate, but that's not visually possible. So yes, there's politics, but there's always politics. I mean, look at the news. So thank you for looking at my work. And I look forward to Susan's work. I know that it's quite beautiful and I know you'll enjoy it.
Thank you, Carol.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Carol.
Thanks, Carol.
All right. So we're moving on to our featured speaker, Susan Bein. She is obviously a photographer, but she's also a teacher, a graphic designer, and a big fan of the iPhone. Early in her career, she studied with Ansel Adams, Minor White, Aaron Siskin, and Paul Caponegro, which is kind of impressive. I noticed that. It also tells you that she's been making images for a while. So without further ado, Susan Bein, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Doug. I'm gonna get my screen going here. And hopefully it will go smoothly. All right, well, that gives it away. I talked to PPF in 2017, and I have to say I had a great time. You were such a great audience, and I felt like a rock star. It was a wonderful experience. So when I was asked to do this, I was all excited. And I thought, well, I can't do the same thing. I have to bring new things, new work. And this last year, I think has been hard on everyone, of course, with the pandemic. But I was very lucky, and I had my own response to the pandemic, which was to kind of go into creative overdrive. It gave me, I wasn't able to travel and I wasn't able to socialize. So the thing that it really gave me was time to really focus and work intensely. And so I had time and I had quiet and I had focus. And right as the pandemic started, I started a project. I met someone in the neighborhood, and he owned two big old houses next door to each other. And his yard was all overgrown with invasive weeds, and he's a character. And I talked him into letting me do the project of cleaning out his yards, cleaning up the weeds. So just as the pandemic hit, I started going to his houses every day. He was at work, I didn't see him, and doing huge amounts of yard cleanup. But he's also a hoarder. And so as I cleaned up the yards, I kept finding things, and I started photographing what I found. And so that was a huge project. You'll see that all through this. I put together a book of the photographs I took this year, and at last count, there were almost 30,000 photographs that I did this year. So I put them together in a book, and this is the book. It just came out, and I was looking for a title, and I was going to be like photographs during the pandemic, something boring, but I remembered that someone wrote something about my photographs in Black and White magazine, and he described them as slightly bonkers. And I thought that was just a great description. So I was going to use that as the title, and I sent it to my sister, and she wrote back slightly. And so now it's slightly totally bonkers, and that's the title of the book. And in putting it together, I put together many photo books for different people, and usually you put one photograph per page with a lot of white around it, and so it gives kind of a visual silence so that the viewer can really take in each photograph and sit with it. But it wasn't practical. It wasn't a practical solution for this book because I have too many photos. And also because I really enjoy sequencing photographs and putting them together so that they play off each other and making themes. So this is, I wanted to give you tonight a little tour of this book and the photographs that I've done in the last 12 months. So that's what we're going to do. I really prefer if people unmute and kind of have a conversation with me, ask questions, make any comments that you have during my presentation. I don't really want to wait till the end and have questions because I'd rather have it be a conversation. So feel free to unmute yourselves and ask things, interrupt. It's fine. It's what I prefer. So I began the book, and what I did was I began with it. I made it into sections with themes, but I began the book with a very short section of some of my favorites, and I put them on facing pages so that they were paired together. So I'm going to just scroll through and we'll look at some. We're not going to see the whole book, but we'll look at some things from each section. So this is a gallery of my favorites, and you can see that I've paired things. I like playing with shapes.
Is this a lifetime of favorite, Susan, or just
So
pandemic
this
favorite?
is just from the last year.
Okay, cool.
I also realized doing this that I really like photographing. I see geometry an awful lot. It's just something that I am drawn to.
Those are paired beautifully, Susan.
Thank you. You know, some of it surprised me. I have to thank someone that's viewing. I put it together, and I asked my friend Tess for input, and she was so great. She was really honest, and she just raked me over the coals and made me look at the book again and differently. And a lot of it, she improved it hugely. So you're seeing the improved version.
And Susan, this is Doug. You may have already mentioned this, but these are all iPhone pictures, right?
They are. Yes, there's an exception. There's one section where me and a lot of people were forced, because we couldn't photograph as much as we wanted, we're forced to kind of go back to our archives. And so there's one section where I went back, I call it the vault. I went back to the vault, and I drew and layered things over some old photographs, and those were not mostly iPhone, but everything else, yes. And there's Tess, my wonderful editor, I'll call her that.
And this edging, is that hipstamatic?
I'm sorry, what?
That edging that you have, that lovely edging.
Yeah, that's an iPhone app.
Hipstamatic?
Yes. And after a while, I use it a lot, you'll see. I use it on almost everything. I realize I don't I don't like my pictures without having some sort of a border on it. It kind of, it's like when you get dressed and you put a piece of jewelry on or something. It seems to be a nice way to finish them with some sort of a
It's
border.
great.
Thank you.
I like the square also.
You know, I do too. And years ago, my father bought me a Hasselblad, mostly because he wanted one, so I was a good excuse. And I never really warmed up to it, and I thought it was because I didn't like squares. But I realized with the iPhone that I love squares. I just didn't like the Hasselblad because it was so sharp and clear, and that wasn't the way I saw the world. It was more of an engineering view of the world, and I see kind of a funky bohemian world. And so this expresses what I see better, and I love squares now. This is typical of things I photograph. There's a lot of shrubs. Maybe it's because I live in Oregon, but there's a lot of shrubbery. There's a lot of geometry. There's a lot of circles and triangles, and a lot of kind of brutalist architecture and kind of grunge. Those elements are repeated a lot.
And if I might add, Susan, there's a lot of exquisite timing.
Of what?
There's a lot of exquisite timing that goes into your geometry and your placement.
Thank you, and some considerable luck. I had a bird fly into my frame last night. It was just, you know, a lot of happy accidents. In the real book, these numbers aren't there, but in the digital version, I can click on them and go to different chapters. That's why you're seeing those. Not really part of the book. This is part of the section where I just draw and paint on pictures and things. So now we get to the—
Susan, just back up a minute. Those are part of your graffiti
Yes.
images, right?
Yes. And I smeared graffiti all over my old pictures. So this was taken with an iPhone. I don't think the original was an iPhone. It's been a long time since I took that one. Mm-hmm. So I did an animals section. You know, one of the things I did this year was walking a lot, and we'll talk about that. But here are some of the animals in the section. There's a whole section on birds and crows. And, I can't zoom in as much here. Let's see. So here's some of the crow pictures. Some of these have been processed in the phone and some have been processed in Photoshop. It's kind of a mix. I do whatever works.
And Susan, are those single frame shots, or did you composite with the birds?
Sometimes it's a mix.
It's a mix.
I think this was a single frame, and I think this was single. It's a mix. It's kind of all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
This one up in the corner was definitely a composite. They did not stand still for that. And I'm not going to dwell on these because there are a lot of pictures and a lot of pages, but this is how they're laid out in the book. And I did have fun with the layout, like the way the branch starts in this picture and almost looks like it goes into this picture. And then that same line at a similar angle is in this vapor trail. You know, so laying out the pages was a fun thing.
So you said you had 30,000 approximate number of images. Must have been an amazing effort to whittle them down to 700 and then again to organize them like this.
It was pretty intense, yes. It was. And part of my motivation was knowing that I was going to speak to PPF. So I've put this together in the last month.
Wow.
And it was, yes, it was an intense month.
So Susan, I'd like to follow up on Pat's comment just now. How did you go through that whittling process?
I decided, Scott Jones, if you know Scott Jones, he's a Portland photographer. He is my executor in terms of if I die, he gets my photographs to do God knows what with. And if I took 30,000 in a year, you can imagine how many I've taken in 50 years.
Yeah.
So he said to me, you know, you should just really do books. And I thought, oh, he's right, I should, because I don't have children. I don't really have, this is my way of leaving some sort of legacy. So I save everything as I photograph. I save it in months. So everything I did in January, everything I did in February. So I went through all 12 months and I just looked at the TIFFs and took my favorites out. And then I sorted them into animals and found objects and still lifes and portraits and different things. So that was my process. And then after Tess had her say and told me that it was kind of basically, without, very, very tactfully told me it was a huge mess. One section in particular, I made a I printed out a contact sheet of, I don't know if you can see it, this little stack of hundreds of 2x2 images, little tiny ones. And I spread them out on my big work table and started grouping them into groups of 6 to put them on the page.
That was clever. And I like, for example, the one on the right, the middle, how you got the roof lines.
Oh yeah, yeah, it was fun when things like that happened. I didn't always, but yeah. I'm glad you noticed, thank you. So birds and more birds and other birds, and then we get to dogs and lots of dogs. I live across the street from a dog park. And I walked around a lot and saw dogs like this one, sitting looking out their window. The resolution isn't as good on my screen as it is in the book, which is too bad, but I guess you can get the general idea. This little fellow poking his nose through. And every once in a while, there was one that just had to be in color. So you'll see things, every once in a while, there's a color one. This car just drove by and stopped right across the street, and there it was.
Susan, when you go out to take photographs, like, are you disciplined and you say, hey, I'm going to take 50 photographs today? Or, you wake up one morning and say, hey, maybe no photos today. How are you with all that, the discipline factor?
The pandemic has really changed that. At first, to stay away from people, I worked in my friends' yards. And that lasted a few months. And it was great. One of his houses has had a fire, and it had been sitting for 2 years, damaged. So we call it the firehouse. So I found all kinds of things to photograph. But after a few months, I was really done there. I had done as much as I could, and I realized I was never going to really make a dent. And then someone on Instagram inspired me to walk every day. And I began walking every day for hours. And so I'm very disciplined. I photograph every day. I post something on Instagram every day. I don't put a limit on the number of photos that I'm going to take. I just and I don't think ahead of time, I'm going to go photograph dogs, or I'm going to go, I just go out and see what I can see. And I walk around, and every once in a while I take my bike. A couple of times this year, my friend Rita, who I see there, very generously masked up, and I masked up, and we had adventures. So there are 2 adventures that I got to go on this year. We went to Sauvie Island, and we went out to the country. But for the most part, these are just walking around the neighborhood, and I call them Rambos. Here's the cat, the cat page. That's a different
Susan,
cat.
can you go back to the dog page for a sec?
Yeah.
So on the left-hand side, the right-hand column, the middle photograph, it looks like an intentional camera movement of the dog.
Uh-huh.
I've tried to do intentional camera movements of, people or dogs, and usually it's the feet that come out sharp and the rest of the body doesn't, but you have just the opposite. How'd you do that?
That I wish I could do that in the iPhone. There are apps that do blurs, but they're not true blurs. They just take several frames and merge them, and it's not the same. So this and many of the pictures you'll see in this book, I do in Photoshop. And I selectively blur what I want and unblur what I don't want. And it's a technique that I use very, very often. And it's kind of the opposite of some of my teachers. Ansel Adams, for example, F64, that whole group. They closed down their aperture so that they could get tons of stuff in focus. I'm the opposite. I don't like too much in focus. I feel like it overloads my visual sensors, and it's too much information. So I tend to blur things, so I only show what I want to show.
Will you be starting an F1.4 group?
I would if I could. A friend of mine, a doctor, and I went photographing, and he got a camera that was a fixed lens, and it was 1.0, I believe. It's a special kind of camera, and I liked his pictures so much that I said, I'm going to get that camera. And he got this funny look on his face, and he said, well, you can borrow mine. I said, no, I'll just get one. And I looked it up, and it was like $7,000. So I use Photoshop to blur.
So Susan, without like going down some rabbit hole, it's just like, how do you do that blur? I don't know how to do that in Photoshop.
Well, I also teach Photoshop.
That's the solution. Okay, never mind.
That is the solution. Okay, so we're on animals, and these are some. Is that Michael Moore who just arrived? I can't tell.
Sorry?
I'm just looking to see. I think Michael a friend of mine just arrived. Okay, so these are some of the things. I call this section found objects. There's some overlap between the sections, but my friend who's the hoarder, whose yard I was, finding all these wonderful things in, he's a very particular kind of hoarder. He likes vintage things, and he keeps buying things. He goes to yard sales and estate sales and buys old tools, and he has a fetish of collecting old plumbing fixtures. And at last count, I had found 18 sinks in his yard. So I like old tools because look at the beauty, just this blade, this beautiful zigzag on the blade. There's something so beautiful about them. So here are some of the things that I found, most in his yard. Sinks, you'll see several sinks. I actually unearthed this under a big pile of brush, this beautiful marble bench. That's just one piece of it. All kinds of tools and things. When I worked to clean out his yard, every time I needed a tool, all I had to do was look around and I would find one.
So what were you doing, Susan? Cleaning out weeds? And what did you do with all these objects when you came upon them? Was he trying to get rid of stuff or what?
No, I wish. All his friends wish. No, I was trying to clean the invasives,
I see.
the invasive weeds, and just, I love organization and I love tidiness. And so it was a great, and I needed exercise and I needed isolation. So it was a great project. And then as a bonus, I found these things and began photographing them. And yeah, eventually I gave up. But
Susan,
yeah.
it's Kathleen Wendland.
Oh,
Hi, I just want to tell you, I love the shadows that you, on that previous page. I mean, the lighting was just beautiful.
oh, thank you. Well, that, you know, I mentioned before you arrived that this fellow who had two houses next door to each other, they were old houses, he just gave me the run of the place. And the one house we called the firehouse because there had been a fire. It was deserted. And so I had a great chance to watch the light in the house as it played out over the days. And so I would deliberately go to different parts of the house during different times to capture the light. I found this plow under a huge pile of ivy. This was in the firehouse. Yeah, so I had, at certain times, I had really great light.
Really beautiful.
Thank you. This table, this was the marble table in his yard. One of his old lovers had a jealous fit and had smashed it. And also, as this project went along, as I stopped working in the yard and started walking around my neighborhood, something else happened. Months later, I got my heart broken, and I won't go into details, but I got my heart broken. And then everywhere I looked, there were flattened things and smashed things and shattered glass. And it was almost funny. You know, this bucket, it was just completely flattened. This is a paint can, completely flattened. A broken heart, a broken table, shattered glass. It just became a theme, and I wasn't looking for it. It wasn't deliberate. Finally, I found some spilt milk, and I thought, okay, universe, I get the metaphor. I get it. I'm moving on.
And I like that you also found the insert to the chocolate box.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
It's at the bottom there.
That was just last week, as a matter of fact. I found that just a few days ago, and I put it in the book just before it went to press. I found this little gizmo off someone's phone. I found this. This is one of those aluminum pans you get to roast a turkey in, you know, for the holidays, and it was completely flat, and it had a hole in it. And I just started carrying it around, and I paired it with the spilt milk, and I tried it, and I found this little fellow just the other day. This whole flattened collection. And more things. I found this, you know, I started, nothing was immune. I found this trash on the street. But I loved the way the fork and the knife were placed. I didn't move them. They were just like that. I almost walked by it, and then I just noticed how perfect they looked. And so now we get to a color page, and here's that same turkey pan, and here it is with the spilt milk and all kinds of other things that I just found on the sidewalk, different pieces of spray paint and, you know, someone's numbered parking space, and just all, you know, it just, but I started really playing. One of the things that inspired me was someone I used to work for. We worked retail, and when she was ringing people up, she would ring all their items up, and she would say, And what else? And what else? And they'd always stop and think, oh, you're right, I need this other thing. So when I photograph, I still hear that question, and what else? And what else? What haven't you seen? What else is there to see? And I love that. It's kind of a permanent part of my brain, you know? You think you're done? Oh, really? Oh, no. Oh, no. There's something else you haven't seen.
So
So
Susan, on the flattened aluminum turkey pan, did you carry that around and make all these images, or is that composited?
I did. I carried it. I photographed it, and then I carried it around and played with how it would look on different things.
Cool.
And then I brought it home. And the next day when I went out, I carried it with me again. And I have, it's now in my basement.
Wow.
I really liked it. I may not be done with it. And then I found this red chair, and it was in a lot filled with graffiti. Everything in the lot was graffiti. And I carried the chair several blocks to do these other pictures. And then I played with the shadows. I don't usually photograph in bright light. I don't like bright light. But I played with the shadows and how my own shadow intersected with the chair. And then I, at the end of doing this for maybe an hour or two, I looked down at my pictures and I loved the grid on my screen. So I ended up making a grid. Another thing I found in the firehouse was I found all these things that belonged to the previous tenants who had been, you know, deserted it for a couple of years. And I found a whole box of paint by number dog pictures. So I photographed those, and I found hair curlers. And I ignored those for a while, but eventually I used those. So more found objects. I also,
Susan?
yes.
Susan, like during this pandemic period, I'm kind of curious as like how many hours per day would you estimate that you spent, you know, doing photography, whether it's like dinking around with the iPhone or actually taking photographs?
Well, I was averaging about 2 hours a day of walking. Sometimes 5, sometimes 1, but average is about 2 hours. And the thing is, I don't really like going out. I don't like leaving the house particularly, especially if it's sunny. So it was very hard to get myself to go out. So what I started doing was, when I did go out, I started finding things and bringing them home. And then every morning before I went out, I would play around doing still lifes on my big work table. Which brings us, it's the perfect segue, thank you. It brings us to still lifes. There's my work table. You can see I had a bunch of stuff that I brought home. Sometimes I would photograph things where they were, but sometimes I would bring things home. And so every morning I started by doing kind of a warm up and doing still lifes. And so I had an artichoke from my garden that had dried out, and I started pulling that apart. And then I thought I was done photographing it. And then the voice came and said, what else? And I photographed it for weeks. It was interesting. Every time I thought I was done, I would see something else. So there's that. And then I started bringing different things home. Most of the stuff is black and white, but these were during those few days, if you remember, we had those horrible fires and the sky turned red. And some of these have texture on them, but this red was really the color of the sky. And I started experimenting with different backgrounds, and I came across this magnolia pod. And it was a very difficult thing to photograph, because if you do that in a square, you just have all this empty space and it's kind of awkward. So I had to find a way to put that in a square. And my solution was to use a pot lid as the background. And I liked it so much that you can see I used it many, many times. And I have different ones. I have all these copper pots, and these are lids to those. And I'm going to go over this. I'm going to go a little faster because I don't have, we don't have time to show the whole book. It's just a preview. But I started finding dropped apples, kind of old funky fruit from old funky trees, and bringing those home, and leaves and rocks and mushrooms, all kinds of things. And I got a phone app that made symmetrical things, and I started playing with that. And then I had some things at home, some feathers and some burnt books and hats. So I did a lot of still lifes. And then I love old botanical drawings, and I can't draw. So I started making photographs that mimicked old botanic drawings. Did a lot of those. And I photographed my compost. There it is. This was in the firehouse. This one with the X was in the firehouse. I found a leaf in his yard, and it was so beautiful. I just took it into the firehouse and started photographing it. This is the firehouse. And that's the end of the still life section. Questions up to this point?
So these still lifes, you're just photographing them on the surface of a table and then adding the textures in, right?
Some of them. Yes, some were on the table. These were the table, the ones that I was mimicking the drawing, those are on a table. Or those are on a piece of paper, and then I added the texture, yes.
Mm-hmm.
These
And do
were
you have to do
these were outside.
Do you have to do any cutting out to add a texture, or you just blending?
I don't use artificial lights, mostly because I'm not good at it. And so I tried to avoid shadows, but I got some, and I realized one of the things about botanical drawings is that they don't have shadows, and that's kind of what I like. I like the flatness of them.
Yeah.
So yes, I had to do some cutting out.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
So I did some portraits. I didn't do many. I met a few people over the last year, but just a handful. And I don't usually, photograph people who aren't watching, but I couldn't resist that one. So some of these are people I know, like Tess. This little fellow is someone I play Pokemon with his parents. This guy who looks like Edgar Allan Poe was in Laurelhurst Park with a view camera, a wooden view camera, with a sign that said free portraits. And he was doing tintypes.
Wow.
And so we traded pictures. I sat for him and he sat for me. Some of these people are homeless. I don't usually, I don't photograph homeless people as a rule because I feel like it's invasive of their privacy, but this guy called out to me and started a conversation, and he was fine with being photographed. And this guy at the bottom, sitting on a newsstand, came up to me. I was on my bike, and he said, "Hey, that's my bike." And I said, "Nice try." And we talked, and he agreed to be photographed. So, sometimes I photograph people when they're up for it. This guy with a cigar saw me photographing from across the street, and he thought I was photographing him, but I was really photographing a building. And he shouted across the street. I couldn't hear what he was saying, and finally I heard it. He said, "Wait, I have to do my hair." He was bald. So I went over and photographed him. He was fine. My neighbors, right at the pandemic, as the pandemic started experimenting with makeup and costumes, and they let me photograph them. So this is a whole page of one of my neighbors. And then this other page of her girlfriend. And they were very generous with letting me photograph them. And this is the infamous Hans with the yard, my friend Hans, the hoarder.
So Susan, I put that picture of Harper on the lower left there on the second one in that article. Explain how you got that reflection.
It's a phone app.
Mm-hmm. And was she posing with the makeup dripping down her face? And
yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was her makeup job.
Mm-hmm. That's a beautiful picture.
Yeah, it was one of my favorites too. You called her Harper? No, Archer.
Oh no, Archer.
Yeah.
Did I say Harper? Archer.
Yeah. I was thinking, what? Who?
Mm-hmm.
Just some random. This is Hans in his messy yard with a bag over his head. And I filled approximately 60 of those bags from his yard just with invasive plants. But it's still totally overgrown.
Did he put the bag over his head himself, or was that, in other words, self-induced or assisted?
I asked him, and he very kindly went along with it. He's a good sport, a very good sport. Oh, and so there's another phone app that I played with. It's silly, but I don't care. I took a picture of Hans, and then you can superimpose vintage photos over photographs. So I did that with Hans and one of his friends, and I just couldn't resist including them.
That's fun.
The app is called Old Booth, and you can use it. You can do photos of your pets as well, and it's so much fun. So then for a while, I wasn't very inspired to photograph, but I went out and I started finding graffiti. And I'm not a big fan of graffiti, but I found things like this that I really liked because they seemed so bold and so energetic. I liked that about them. So I started photographing things like this. And then I started putting them over my photos like paint. And you can see that I started painting on my own photos and putting graffiti and really playing and pushing to try to see further.
Susan, how long does it take for your phone to fill up?
I empty it pretty much every day.
Okay.
So I don't fill it up. Hard drives is a whole different story.
And which phone are you using?
I have an iPhone 11 Pro. And I use a few apps. At the end of the book, I list which apps I use and what I use them for and stuff like that. So this is just playing. Here I wasn't using graffiti, I was just painting and playing. And I'll probably do some more. I did all kinds of things. So some of these are not iPhone pictures. These are, but a few of them are not. Okay, now it gets kind of embarrassing, but I don't like being photographed particularly, but because I'm usually alone, I do a lot of selfies. And because I have a bald head, which is not chemo, I'm just bald, and I have distinctive glasses, it's kind of like having, I carry that around with me wherever I go. So I don't do these to be silly. Some of them are really silly, but that's not my aim. I really see my head in glasses as kind of a sculptural element. And I like photographing things that I can add to that sculptural element. So that's what I set out to do. Every once in a while, I photograph one because it is really silly, but usually I'm trying to make a good composition and a kind of sculptural statement. And so these are the ones I did of the things I found at Hans's. And I gave them a certain look. There's one of the paint by numbers paintings. And a lot of old tools, pieces of gutter, just you name it, it's in his yard. You can find anything in his yard.
Great.
And yeah, some of them are very creepy. And then when it turned fall, I started finding really beautiful leaves. So I started playing with those on my head and making masks out of them. And my garden was in full fluff. So there's spinach and there's Swiss chard, and Hans had a bulb that he forced, so I put that on my head.
Are you using a selfie stick?
No, I don't have one. I've actually considered getting one because my arms are so short that I can't hold it far enough away to position things. But no, these are all just done by holding it out in front of me. Every once in a while, there's something I can't balance on my head. Most things I can, but for example, these pet tanks, I couldn't balance those on my head. So I just put them on the floor in my house and lay down. And same with the pine cones.
I love how alive and interested you look in all of these.
Thanks. That's part of the photograph, so it has to kind of go with it. Sometimes I try to be really neutral. Sometimes, I roll my eyes or do something. It's a mix. I kept finding plastic dinosaurs in different yards. And then Rita and I drove by Omsi, and there's a huge life-size one. So I did these like 2 weeks ago. I also go out no matter the weather. I go out when it's pouring rain. I go out when it's snowing. I went out during that ice storm. I think I took the best picture I've ever taken in my whole life during the ice storm of those two dogs, the one with his arm around the other. That was during the ice storm. So a lot of these, you can see I'm in full rain regalia. And then that became part of things as well. I try to just like no excuse. If it's night and I haven't gone out, I go out at night. There's no excuse. So these are more, I got kind of into making leaf masks. And this was one of the heartbroken pages, the fragile, the things like that. And I found words and I had fun with those. And buildings. And one day I just put a bag on my head for no apparent reason. There's the curlers that I found in the firehouse. This is a page of circles and page of triangles, and I like shrubs. And more things. One day I have two iPhones, an old one, so I took a picture with my old one and then I used it as a mask to hold in front of my face and play with that. Sometimes I found trash. This thing was just a piece of, food service, a cover of something, and I just brought it home and made a mask out of it. I got vaccinated, so I made that a photo. My little Pfizer badge.
So do you hoard this stuff as well, Susan, or do you get rid of it after you're done?
I have some in my, I'm super minimal, but I have some I have kind of a prop shop in my basement where I've saved various masks and things that I've found. So I do that. I save things, but you won't see them all over my house.
No, I've been in your house. It's quite blank.
It's almost, yeah, I have almost no furniture. I know, I'm kind of a nut that way.
And can
I
I
don't
just
have a
add, can I just add something, Susan, that you won't say? Susan will go to Paris for 3 weeks with a backpack. Now, no luggage, but a backpack, and come home with 8,000 photographs. No
From
suitcase.
the first day.
No suitcase.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I travel light. All I'm interested in, you know, now I've got it down to a bag that fits under the seat. I don't even put things in the overhead.
You travel with an iPhone, so you don't have to have too much baggage for your camera gear.
That's part of the beauty of it, yes. I started using, let's see, sometimes to get these, I have to lie, like the mushrooms, I had to lie down. I was lying in the parking lot of an office park. And because in the shrubs of the parking lot, there were these amazing mushrooms. They were actually red caps. They were amazing. And I kept finding them. So I lay down in the parking lot and I was doing this picture and the security guard came. And he asked me what I was doing and I showed him the photograph. And I've never seen anyone leave as fast in my life. He couldn't wait to get away. Yeah, it pays to be a nut sometimes. This page, they're all things that are shattered and fragmented. This page doesn't quite hold together, but oh well. But someone asked me about tattoos and I don't have any, but this is mine. If I did this to show them what I would do. Let's see if I can zoom in a little. This is, if I had a tattoo, this is my life motto. Don't think, just see. Don't know, just flow. And it's from a David Foster Wallace book. And I just love it. So I started playing with all these wacky, you know, symmetry apps and things, and they got pretty wacky. And another theme that I did, if you watch the time, is that I started adding my head in glasses to cars, like this VW. It just fit perfectly with the sculptural quality of the cars, or the horse trailer. Actually, this is Hans owns this old 1939 Buick. That's one of Hans's cars. He has 4 cars, of course. And the fins on the lower right, that's his car named Steve. This is the fins from it. It's a 1957 Dodge. So I did a lot of car, and again, I ended up, to get some of these, I ended up sitting in the street or laying in the gutter in the pouring rain because I had to get the right angle to fit with the car. I found a house full of, that their yard was full of these toy cars. And I knocked on the door and he let me photograph those on my head. So last section, these are photographs I took walking around. You'll see themes. Some of them are at night, a lot of blurs, because a lot of what I see is too busy and too cluttered for my taste, but I see some beauty that I want to capture. So I'm not shy about blurring things. It's part of how I see things. So I photograph at night. I photograph a lot of industrial things. I love industrial things. This one page was when Rita and I went out to the country. So this is the one exception. These are a couple of rambles that we did that were out in the country.
So Susan, just to interrupt for a second, all that is you've done in post, all that blurring.
A lot of it in post, yes.
Okay.
Yep, I own it.
Totally do. You
when
totally do.
When they come up with a variable shutter speed in the iPhone, I'll be the first in line.
Because it doesn't happen now.
Not really. There's an app, but it's not the same. It doesn't give you what this gives you. Before I stopped using the DSLR, I did many in-camera blurs. I love doing them. And I have a little fixation on on heating vents and other such things. This was another page I had fun with, watching the flags and the wires come together, the buildings. And this was another page that was a happy accident, the way that this net, which was photographed on different days, kind of came together. And this fence, these photographs were taken on different days of from completely different places and just kind of came together. So happy accidents. This spread, these are all things I saw faces in. And this page I just call paranoia. I kept seeing helicopters and photographing them, especially during the riots here. They were just omnipresent. So I put together a paranoid page. More found things. This is a parking garage at the doctor's office where I go. So I don't drive, so I bike there, and I had to go into the parking garage on my bike, and I realized it was a beautiful parking garage. Took pictures of it. Few people, not many. Some color, not much. I started looking at sidewalks and things on sidewalks. A lot of industrial areas. This is in the firehouse. And these are in other places. And these are at night. These are some of my night shots. And then I hate snow, but it snowed here, so I took pictures of snow. And I put that in again because I couldn't resist. And then there was a fire down the street at night. And so I went and spent 3 hours taking pictures of watching them put the fire out. And there's a section on multiples. And then I have a whole page of things that inspired me. There's a rant and a bio and some thanks. Some of you are in there. There's Rita and there's Tess and Jim. Some technical stuff. And my business card, which is a very silly business card. And that's it.
So Susan, when you look at this book now, like what's your takeaway about yourself? Like what did you learn about yourself? Like now that you've done this book and hopefully you're far enough away that you can kind of look at it.
That's a good segue because this is my takeaway. I'm totally bonkers. A bit eccentric. It's helped me to notice patterns in how I see things. But, none of us like to repeat ourselves too often. So I'll still be pushing to do something that I haven't done yet. But I would say that this is the perfect title for this book.
If you if you want to reclassify creative genius as totally bonkers, then so be it. 'Cause you are one creative gal.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Susan, I'm curious. I'm curious if you do you make prints for the wall, or do you mainly like to present your work in books?
Both. I've been selling prints lately, and it's really quite exciting. I just sold one to someone in Italy,
Wow.
and to my friend Michael in Canada, and to someone in Hawaii. People find me on Instagram and buy prints.
Because yeah, I would imagine that people are, would want, to have their own image on the wall. Is there a size that you typically do that you like to do for these images?
Yeah, my printer comfortably prints up to 12 inch. It prints 13, but I usually print them 12 by 12. Someone requested 20 by 20, and
Here.
I can't
Oh,
see
there
you,
they
but I
are.
Oh, there's
Yeah.
a couple on the wall right there.
Right there.
Oh,
20.
I want to see it. I haven't seen it on the wall. I have to move this
Cool.
out of the way. I'm going to stop screen sharing so that we can. Oh, that's so exciting.
There they are, Susan.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Oh my. I see, and they fit in with what else you have.
What's that?
They fit in with the other things you have on your wall.
They fit in perfectly.
Look at that. That's great.
Oh, so yes, I sell prints.
20 by 20, perfect size.
Oh, good, good. But I had to get those printed by, I had ProPhoto print those because my printer only goes 1319. So that was, but yeah, 12 by 12 is my usual, or 13 by 13.
Well, if I could put in a shameful plug, I know everybody's not got enough of Susan Bein after tonight. So we collaborated on this article, Susan, at Oregon Arts Watch. So if you want the link to that article about you, then I think it's in Doug's email today.
Yeah, it was in the email that went out this morning. There's a link to your profile of Susan. It's very nice. And there's also a link to Blurb if you want to see her book. It's available through Blurb.
Yeah, I'm trying to make a digital version so that if people want a less expensive version of it, they can still have it. But I'm running into technical problems because it's such a huge file. Blurb makes digital books, but it's too big for them. It's a huge file. So I'm making a smaller version, but it's taking a while.
Susan,
Yeah.
like Michael, I've got over my shoulder here one of your other series from a few years ago. Can you see the? Yeah. I think that's a 16 by 20.
Oh wow.
Your profiles of your friend.
Yeah, that was a whole series. Yeah. With those are in camera. Those are done with the iPhone.
She doesn't make print.
What?
So you do make prints, I guess was my point. Yeah.
Yes. Those are in camera double exposures on the iPhone, which is quite a trick, but it's possible. So thank you very much, PPF, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was terrific. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Susan. It was great.
Thanks for chiming in, and I really appreciated you talking with me throughout. That really made it easy for me. And wow, thank you again.
Well, Susan, thank you so much for agreeing to present tonight. It was wonderful to see your work, and really appreciate you taking the time. So I think with that, we're right up at 9 o'clock. So I think we will call it a meeting, and thanks to everyone for attending, and we'll see you next time.
Can you tell me how many people attended?
I think we had about 48 to 50 people.
I think it was 45, I think it said 45 participants.
Okay,
When-
Susan.
Thank you.
Susan,
Hey, Ray.
how long do you think it would take you to teach an old guy like me how to do that selective blur online?
You already do Photoshop, right?
A bit, not much.
It would probably take about an hour.
Sweet. And you're gonna, how much is it gonna cost me?
I charge $50 an hour.
Sweet. So let's do that. I'll write you an
Cool.
email. I'll write you an email.
Okay, deal.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, everyone.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you
Thanks
so
again.
much.
All right, good
Thank
night.
you, everybody. Good night.
Bye.
Good night from Ken.
Oh, good night, Michael.
Good night.
Oh, it's
Susan,
really